Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about Unrest. It's a post-mortem of a game that, can you guys read that? Okay, so, alright, so first a quick introduction. I started making games in roughly 2007 when I was in college. I worked on Dystopia. It was a multiplayer cyberpunk shooter. You guys have played Counter-Strike, I assume, or heard of it. And then I started making my own games while I was in college, and so far I've made 3 of them. And yeah, that's my Twitter stuff. I don't know if you guys Twitter, like, that's a thing here. Okay, so a quick introduction about what Unrest is. So Unrest is a role-playing game set in a fantasy interpretation of ancient India. And the emphasis on the game, instead of like combat and action sequences and set pieces, it's on exploration, conversation, narrative. And it features a hand-drawn art style with like classical Indian themes, and the soundtrack was also using classical Indian instruments. And it's a cross-platform game as long as you don't count mobile. So yeah, and we released on Steam, GOG, Humble, all of this stuff. So So I started making Unrest after my second game was released, and that was roughly in 2012. So about 2 years ago, maybe more. I'm not good at counting. Alright, so this was the first version of Unrest. If you guys don't know what Will Fight for Food, my previous game was, it was a combination of Double Dragon and Mass Effect, if that makes any sense, right? So Unrest version 1 was a direct continuation of that. Same mechanics, just a different world and a different conversation system. And this game was, at that time, I wasn't 100% sure of what I wanted in it. So at that time, I was like, oh yeah, you know what? I'm going to make an open world RPG. It's going to have 3 cities. One of them is going to be Indian, one of them is going to be Chinese, one of them is going to be Aztec. Because why the hell not, you know? That's why we're in this business. And like the idea was that there won't be any dungeons. You know, like in Oblivion, you go into a dungeon, and you guys have played Oblivion, right? You know what Oblivion is. Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, no? Okay. Okay. So yeah, so instead of going into dungeons and having combat, what you would have is like, you could initiate combat at any point in the world. It was very tabletop in that sense. You know, like, yeah, I bet you guys haven't played tabletop RPGs, so. Okay, so yeah, the idea was that instead of going into specific combat zones and non-combat zones, the game would take place in just one zone, and the player would decide at what point to initiate combat, and the game would react to it. So for example, if you just initiate combat in the middle of a town square, that would have some consequences beyond just like you killing 10 guards and then combat over, and then you go back to like exploring and stuff. So it was a pretty ambitious concept. How many of you guys like work in games, have made at least one game before? Right. So you guys know that an open world that reacts to you with no discrete combat zones, with 3 different cities and the adjoining area, is a huge ask. And here I was with a team of 4 people just trying to make this game. And so this was the world map which we ended up with. The city at the bottom, that's the one with the Chinese inspirations. The one at the top left was the Indian city, and the one in the top right was the Aztec city, and all of this area was supposed to be navigable. So that ended up being, a little tricky, and eventually what we ended up with was a series of half-finished vertical slices. Like there was one combat vertical slice, there was one prototypes, nothing cohesive. Because a vision like that needs a lot of people to competently execute. And then what happened was that everyone lost faith in the project. There were 4 of us, and all of us were working as hobbyists. None of us was being paid. So during an independent project, if you're not making consistent headway, you're always working on the next, like, okay, we have this festival, we're going to present it on this, and then you're always working towards the next vertical slice instead of the actual game. And that basically embodies the worst like place your game development can be stuck in. So that's the reason why what happened was that I was the only person left on the team. The artists, the scripters, everyone left. because nobody thought like this game would ever come into existence. And then, like, this was basically, if you take one thing away from this presentation, it's this. It's that if you're stuck working on a bad idea that you're not satisfied with, you're not, you think like, why am I working on this? Why do I even care? Then my suggestion is that it's never too late to abandon something like that. Because think of it as like you've already sunk this much effort into this. Why sink even a little bit more? And release something you're not happy with, release something that doesn't work, that you would not be, that you wouldn't be able to say that, yeah, this was the best I could make. So, and now coming back to the development of Unrest, so what I did was I built another team. I got a bunch of new people, and we started with Unrest version 2. And this logo was basically, it's a badly photoshopped version of the first Unrest logo made by me. So the idea here was to aggressively eliminate anything that was not, that wasn't core to the game. So like open world, yeah, that was the first thing that went out. Instead of 3 cities, I was like, well, look, why did I start making this game? Because I wanted to see a game done in the style of, you know, fantasy RPGs, but with an Indian setting, with Indian characters, with Indian flavor, and stuff like that. So I was like, yeah, I don't need the other 2 cities. So I changed the focus, only went towards like the one ancient Indian city. And what I did was, the game was, since it was like Oblivion style, so you had different factions in different cities, each with interesting characters at the helm, and you could progress through them. But that created a game in which a blank slate protagonist was a necessity. Like you couldn't have a protagonist who, like for example, is also a priest, and also like when he goes to the other city suddenly becomes a warrior type person, and then in the third city is the member of the Thieves Guild or whatever, without having that character be a blank slate. Because it's, like as a writer, it's impossible to bring these conflicting things into a cohesive narrative. Like how does a character like that even work? Who like is also the member, the head of the Thieves Guild and is the head of the Warriors Guild or whatever. So the idea was, that's how the idea of 4 different protagonists came about. Because of the varying nature of roles that you can play in this game, the idea was to create interesting protagonists instead of blank slates, and give them, that way we could have fleshed more of them out. Because like for example, one of our protagonists was just a priest. So in that case I can be like, yes, this is a priest. So what does a priest do? So then the quests, the motivations, everything was related to that. And that meant that the narrative was way more cohesive than this. So this was the world map. So if you can see, like the size it's way constrained. It's zoomed in on one city instead of being this epic sprawling map. Now it's in one city, and all of these locations roughly corresponded to the locations of the major factions. Yeah, it's probably not readable, but the way we went about designing the game is the way you design your tabletop role-playing campaigns. If you've ever played it, what happens is the DM first creates a world and then invites the characters into the world. And there's no, ideally there's no pre-built, the DM isn't there to railroad you into his awesome story. The players are in that world to create their own story. So that was the approach we took. We had this world, we created these factions and everything, and then we invited the players and gave them all realistically possible choices and invited them to make their own plot out of it. Now these are the 4 protagonists as they ended up in the game. So the guy on the left is the soldier, the woman in the middle is the princess, and then the girl on the right middle is the farmer girl, and the guy on the right is the priest. So that's where these 4 protagonists took shape. So this was heavily inspired by Pulp Fiction. You guys have seen Pulp Fiction at least, right? Yeah, okay, thank you. So, okay, so now we had a new team, and so when I recruited a new team, it's always like the initial step is the hardest. You get used to each other, how you work, that type of thing. So for nowadays, like many of the tools and such are free, like Dropbox, Mercurial. We use Bitbucket for source control, and a lot of Google Docs to keep issues and stuff in track. And so the team is roughly structured like I'm the programmer. I live in Jaipur. The animator is from Hyderabad, and then the writer is from California. A scripter is from Canada, and the artist is from Estonia. So we are situated pretty much all across the globe. So when you're working like that, you need a very strict schedule in terms of meetings and deadlines and all of that stuff, because when you have a sprint and everyone's in a different time zone, it becomes very tricky to get everyone, to give everyone ample time to actually like accomplish their tasks and communication. So we have meetings twice per week, in a time that's inconvenient for virtually everyone, but somehow we make it. And so after this team was there, we made a prototype. It looked like this, and this was the prototype which we went to Kickstarter with. It was a fairly rough game in terms of art, but the basic systems were there. Like if you can make out in this, on the left screen you see the HUD and the level layout. And on the right side, you see the conversation system in action. It's very small, but so yeah, at that time, roughly, we had an idea of what our game was going to be like, and that's the vision we went to Kickstarter with. And I won't talk about it that much because I already talked about it last year. So look it up on YouTube. And so now after Kickstarter, our Kickstarter was funded like over 12 times or something. So what we ended up with was a lot of people interested in the concept, but the design-wise, we needed to make that final step from prototype to actual release quality. So for that, what we did was, since we not just, but like it was only an year since Unrest V1 had basically failed. So I kept the same design, didn't try to add a lot of stories, didn't suddenly become again it's an open world. Just added one new player character and a location corresponding to them. And we initiated a process of constant feedback and iteration. So what would happen is, if I had the most pending tasks related to programming, so I would constantly commit, and the other members of the team would playtest. And since we were only a team of 4, we didn't have a dedicated QA department or anything. So if the programming was the major focus in that particular sprint, then the other members of the team became QA testers. And then if there was a major art sprint, like a new set of levels, a new character, a lot of new animations, then the artist would become the person who's doing the work, and the rest of us would become the QA team. So with that process, development went pretty smoothly, like nobody left, at least, so that's a positive. And then yeah, it was pretty uneventful, and like an uneventful development process is the best gift you can ask for. So, and now I created this lovely corporate looking chart as to how our team works, right? So like it's all very like, synergy and like pie charts and stuff. But basically, me and Ratskarn, our writer, we start out in the design phase. And at that time, we are like, okay, let's say we want to make a new area in the game. We're like, okay, what's the purpose of this area? If once the player finishes playing through this area, what do we want the player to come away with? What do we want the player to think once they end up with this area? And so first, both of us finalize the design. Then I'm like, okay, how much extra programming will this work? Like, will this just work with our existing code base? No new features, no new mechanics or anything? And then we figure out if it's feasible or not. If it's feasible, then we move on to the second step, in which a majority of the writing is done and a majority of the art is done. And once this phase usually takes the longest time because it's the most work-intensive phase. And then the next step is scripting the writing that was just done and tweaking and polishing the levels. So for example, usually when you script a role-playing game that's very open-ended, you end up with a lot of bugs. So this phase is mostly polish. And then the fourth phase is feedback and testing, in which towards the end of the development cycle, for example, all 4 of us were in this feedback and testing phase. But like I said earlier, the people who are not doing the bulk of the work, they become QA testers. So for example, in the art and writing phase, the scripter and we become the QA testers. We give constant feedback about how it's going and if any changes need to be made. And with this process, and after 12 months, we were ready to launch Unrest, and yeah, so we did. And as of now, we've got roughly 60 reviews and like 40 YouTube videos-ish, and like 75% positive reviews on Steam, and a lot of press and stuff, like they tweeted and all of that stuff, whatever. And roughly in feedback, what we did was we compiled all of this feedback and the other stuff we received into roughly 3 categories. So in general, our writing and the scenarios and the gameplay and how the choices were presented. By gameplay, I mean like, since it's a role-playing game, it's all about like conversation systems and how these choices are presented. Like, to give you an example, you can't just drop the player in and like give them a tree that says like, what do you want to be? Do you just want to like be a completely lawful good character, or do you just want to be ideally what you do is you drop the player and then you introduce them to a scenario, and then you see how they react, and that's how you decide their alignment. So that part was at least widely acclaimed, and then there was a mixed reaction to the art style and lack of combat, and the game was considered as short by many. Because it is short by usual, like, you know, ATR RPG standards. So, and then the lack of polish is what I mean by roughness, and low production values were perceived as a negative because there were certain like certain characters were like weird to handle because they are hitboxes and such. So yeah. So overall, what like how we did promotion for this game, like a lot of people ask me how we managed to get like all of this press and stuff. It's just like email everyone every day, and we try to be like not too imposing on social media. Like if somebody says like, you know, mentions us and be like, oh yeah, we liked your game, we're not instantly like, oh cool, could you tell me what you liked, and like we try to be a little more professional. And like you need to interact with players on Reddit and forums and all of that stuff, but like it's crucial to maintain your distance, because if you interact too much with them, then they take it as a you know, like a sort of negative, where it's hard to explain social media. So, and a key thing to do is to like not underestimate the value of polish. So I'm pretty sure if we had spent like a couple of more months on polish, even though like our budget necessitated that we couldn't, we would have gotten better press because of it. Because the market we are competing in is just like filled with polished games. You have people who like refuse to pay even like $2 for an insanely polished game. So that's just the reality of the situation. And I feel like polish is ultimately what determines like a game which a few people have heard about and like which everyone has heard about. So, and okay, so I'm just gonna, there were some other things too that helped us in our promotional stuff. 2 of them were festivals which we went to. So Resd and Indicade are 2 festivals in the UK and California, and we went there, we showed our game, got a like nice response, or at least everyone was polite. So, and so if you can afford to go to one of these expos, I suggest you do. But like it's not a complete necessity, because or you can at least attend this conference in the future years. So, and then we were in a humble bundle. So a lot of people asked us how we like ended up on a humble bundle. So the answer actually is that I don't know. Like I was traveling, and then when I touched down, like the guy was like, "Oh hey, yeah, we are on a humble bundle." So I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." So yeah, it's just like, yeah, I don't know how that happened. I couldn't tell you if and because of the positive press from our one game, my previous game got greenlit on Steam. It was sort of stuck in green light limbo. But due to a lot of people going, yeah, I like the Unrest, I want to play more games like it. So our previous game also got greenlit. and it will release in January or so on Steam. So, and after we finished with our game, we immediately moved on to our next project, and that's this game, Late to the Party. So after Unrest, like a lot of, we weren't sure of the direction we wanted to take the team in, because all of the team members